As long as she thinks of a man, no one objects to a woman thinking. Virginia Woolf. I hate to hear you talk about all women as if they were fine ladies instead of rational creatures. None of us wants to be in calm waters all of our lives. Jane Austen. As soon as a woman gets to an age where she has opinions and she's vital and she's strong, she's systematically shamed into hiding under a rock. Sarah Silverman. Feminism isn't about making women stronger. Women are already strong. It's about changing the way that the world perceives that strength. G.D. Anderson. These quotes are powerful, and what underlies all of them? Feminism. But feminism is not a modern movement. The term was actually first coined back in the 1890s. Just me starting out this way has probably caused you to attach a few labels to me already. Let me help you name a couple. Liberal, millennial, feminist. But that's not why I'm here to talk to you today. I'm not here to convince you to become a feminist, or to abandon feminism, or to explain the different waves of feminism. I'm simply here to ask you, how did we get to this modern feminist movement? Do you know? Because for a while, I didn't know. Let's be real, feminism is not a millennial movement, even though that's what I hear college students and other teenagers my age say, and that's what I hear older people mutter under their breath at the grocery store, and that's definitely what I see on my Facebook feed. But I know that my aunts, mother, and grandmothers have fought for the same concepts that many modern feminists claim to have invented. Here's the thing. Feminism might have been pushed to the forefront of social discourse by millennials, but it's not a millennial concept in any way. And maybe we're a lot more similar to our grandmothers than we think. Today, I propose to you that the age-old movement of feminism stems from shifts in gender roles perpetuated during industrialization in the 1700s. So now let's give you some context for this. Essentially, industrialization was that time in the world where we moved from an agriculturally based economy to an industry-based one, and most of us has probably learned about this in our history classes. And historian Sonia O'Rose really explained this well whenever she said in the 1990s in her work, Limited Livelihoods, Gender and Class in 19th Century England, that as we had the transfer of production from a household, from the cottage industry to the factories, we had an important distinction that changed with labor. And so as we have industries such as hosiery and the production of cloth, under the cottage industry before industrialization, that labor is done as a unit and then they're paid as a unit. But then once we move to factories, we have labor now being paid individually. And thus, whenever someone is being paid individually for their labor, value is assigned individually. Additionally, this caused a lot of different social changes as far as how men and women were viewed within society. Sonia O'Rose again explained it well whenever she said that men were viewed as strong, independent, and rational, while women were often viewed as weaker, dependent, emotional, etc. And the reason for this is because before, like I said, they weren't defined socially. And so women were not as legally independent as men were. And so they were often confined to the home and doing more domestic things, being mothers. And there's nothing wrong with that. Women and men have had different roles for centuries, but they weren't socially stigmatized roles because of how labor was viewed. And now I realize this is an overly simplified view of how this transition worked, and there's a lot more history to go into here. But this should give us enough context for our discussion today. And I do encourage you to go and do further research into this topic because it's fascinating, and there's a lot of great work out there. But now let's move on to the cultural redefinition of gender roles. Thus, the desire to right these wrongs and end defined gender roles began with women's rights movements, voting equality, and more. But keep in mind, as these movements started to simmer in the 1800s, the feelings and the changes were simmering before that, back in the 1700s. But now let's talk about the current. How does this apply to us? And how does this apply to you? Well, a recent poll done by the New York Times in 2015 showed that 18% of Americans identify with being feminists, but 85% of Americans identify with wanting female equality. So why is there this discrepancy? Why is there some sort of negative connotation around the term feminism? Well, perhaps because it's been labeled as a millennial movement. And while I'm an American, I'm not just talking about American statistics right now. I'm talking about the global movement of feminism that has spiked in the last few decades. And there's justification for this. The United Nations Women's website published in 2015 that women still participate at an unequal ratio to men in labor markets. Globally, women earn 60 to 75% of a man's wage, averaged out. And within our own country, the Institute for Women's Policy Research has shown that women earn 80 cents on the dollar compared to men in America. I'm not okay with this, and I personally see this as a problem, and I hope that you do too. And maybe that's why my generation has picked up this movement and carried it forward. But here's the crux of the argument. Millennials. There's something special about our generation. In the US, the Brookings Institution did a poll which shows that by 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be made up of millennials. And additionally, millennials have been proven to care intensely about social issues, and this informs the way that they make decisions and career choices. Our grandmothers and great-grandmothers started this fight and wanted the same thing, but maybe it's our job to carry the movement forward and actually achieve equality. Millennials. When was the last time in history that you saw a march, such as the recent marches on Washington D.C. after the inauguration? And now I realize that many people disagree with the sentiment of the marches, but whether or not you agree with the sentiment is besides the point. The point is that we have this ability within our society to rise up and march on every city in America for something we believe in, regardless of what that is. And I think that that's pretty amazing. Crayola recently did an initiative as far as racial equality to make crayons that were colored for different ethnicities, but all titled Flesh. And in the same way that we have been able to strive for more racial equality within our country and within our world, we should be striving for that same sort of gender equality. One of my heroes, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, once said, "History is but one long struggle upwards to equality." And personally, I believe in equality. Don't call me a feminist, and don't define me as a millennial. My goal here today has partially been to remind you that men and women have struggled with achieving equality ever since we've inhabited the earth, and we probably never fully will. But the key is awareness, and I'm a firm believer that we cannot label people and end gender inequality because we have the passion to. Would the world be run by Germany if good people hadn't stood up during World War II and said no to inequality? And would Africa be making the humanitarian and societal improvements that we've seen in the last few decades if people hadn't globally aided and globally supported them to end colonial abuses? You should feel fulfilled and inspired to know that our generation, my generation, your generation, truly can achieve equality for all. But it's not our strict and specific burden. It's been going on for a long time, longer than that. It's a choice. And if you choose with me to peacefully seek equality for all, then welcome.